It started quietly, far away from the noise of cities and wars. Decades before anyone even knew that other life existed beyond the stars, humans had sent a small message into deep space. It wasn't grand or poetic, just honest. The message carried only a few lines. We come in peace, but we defend our home. No one on Earth thought much about it at the time. It was one of many signals launched into the void by scientists who dreamed of life beyond the solar system. To them, it was a small gesture of curiosity, maybe even hope. They believed that if anyone ever heard it, they would understand that humanity was ready to meet others as equals, not as conquerors. For centuries, that message traveled through the dark, passing stars and frozen worlds, bouncing off dust clouds and cosmic storms. And then, somewhere far beyond what human telescopes could see, it reached them. The Galactic Empire. The empire was old, older than Earth's written history. It had risen and fallen through countless ages, each time rebuilding itself with the same belief, that they were destined to rule the stars. They had conquered hundreds of planets, enslaved entire species, and built fleets so vast that they could block out suns. When the small human signal reached one of their listening outposts, the operators almost ignored it. To them, it was just another primitive noise from a backwater system. But when they decoded the words, curiosity spread through the ranks. The message didn't beg for peace or mercy. It declared it. We come in peace, but we defend our home. The phrase was studied by scholars, linguists, and philosophers across the empire. Some laughed at its simplicity. Others found it strangely unsettling. A young advisor in the emperor's court brought it to his attention, reading it aloud before the gathered council. The emperor listened, amused. A primitive species sending warnings to the stars? He said with a dry smile. Do they think the galaxy will tremble at their words? The court erupted in laughter. To them, humanity was just another newly awakened race, one that had not yet learned its place. But one man did not laugh. He was an old scholar who had served the empire since before the current emperor's reign. His face was marked by the years and the weight of too much wisdom. He stood and bowed slightly. My emperor, he said carefully, I advise you not to take this lightly. The young species who send such messages do so with pride. A world that can speak with such conviction, even while standing alone, may not be as weak as it seems. The emperor's amusement faded for a moment. You believe this tiny world could threaten us? I believe, Majesty, the scholar replied softly, that we have forgotten how dangerous hope can be. The court fell silent for a heartbeat before the emperor waved a hand dismissively. Hope is a tool for the weak. Let them dream. And with that, the discussion ended. The message was archived, labeled as Unverified Primitive Transmission 9247. The warning, small as it was buried under layers of bureaucracy and pride. Time passed. Empires forget easily, especially when they believe they cannot be touched. Generations changed, rulers rose and fell, and the human message became nothing more than a footnote in ancient data archives. On Earth, humanity continued to evolve. Wars came and went. Nations argued, then united. The planet saw both the worst and best of itself, learning slowly that survival wasn't about domination. It was about understanding. They expanded to the moon, then Mars and beyond. By the time the Galactic Empire finally noticed them again, humanity was no longer crawling among the stars. They were walking, but that's much later in the story. For now, the first warning, the one that might have changed everything, sat quietly in the Empire's vaults, gathering dust. Still, not everyone had forgotten. There was a small order of historians within the Empire, keepers of the old records. Their job was to preserve ancient transmissions and study unknown civilizations. Among them, one young historian stumbled upon the message again while cataloging ancient files. She replayed it over and over, fascinated by its tone. It wasn't fear or arrogance. It was something else. Determination, maybe. She brought it to her mentor, the same old scholar who had once spoken in the emperor's court. His eyes widened when he saw the file. I thought this was lost, he murmured. Who are they? She asked. Humans, he said quietly. A species from a small blue world. I warned the emperor long ago not to ignore them. The young historian smiled faintly. Do you think they've changed? The scholar's gaze drifted toward the stars beyond his window. Everything changes, child. The question is whether we will recognize what they've become when we meet them again. He didn't know then that his words would one day echo across the galaxy. Back on Earth, people had forgotten about the old probe too. Generations had passed since its launch. But in one quiet archive deep beneath the old United Council's research center, a small group of scientists still tracked its journey. They knew that if anyone had heard their message, it would take centuries to get a reply. Sometimes they would joke about it. "Maybe they heard us," one scientist said, looking at the stars. "Maybe they're laughing," another smiled. "Let's just hope they understood the second part." It was a strange thought, that a single message, no longer than a few words, might one day decide the fate of worlds. But humanity didn't send it to threaten anyone. It was more like a promise to themselves, a line they would never cross. Peace first, always, but never surrender to cruelty. Far away, the Empire continued its slow decay. The signs were everywhere. Corruption in the Senate, endless rebellions on the outer colonies, fleets spread thin, keeping control. The Emperor's grip was strong but trembling. His advisors spoke of new worlds to conquer, fresh resources to mine, new species to enslave to restore the glory of old. And somewhere in those endless council debates, someone mentioned Earth again. A developing world, they said, rich in water, metal, and energy. Barely defended, easy prey. The name Earth stirred something faint in the old scholar's mind. He stood, frail but determined, and spoke once more. "Majesty, I have heard of this world before. It was they who sent the message and the warning, remember?" The Emperor frowned. "A myth from the archives?" "No, Majesty," the scholar said. "A truth ignored. Do not repeat that mistake." The court grew silent again. The Emperor looked at him for a long time before shaking his head. "You grow fearful in your age, old one. We have nothing to fear from a single planet." And with those words, the Empire set its path, one that would soon lead straight toward Earth. The old scholar returned to his chambers and looked at the stars. He could feel it, the same quiet unease that had haunted him for decades. He whispered softly to himself, "They warned us once. May the stars forgive us if we don't listen again." Far across the dark sea of space, Earth's satellites continued to hum quietly. The message, still moving outward at the speed of light, carried on. A faint echo of humanity's heart, drifting toward those who might one day hear it again. It was not a threat. It was a line drawn in silence, and the universe, though vast and ancient, would soon remember what happens when that line is crossed. The Empire was old, and with age came decay. Its banners still hung over hundreds of worlds, but the meaning behind them had faded. The people no longer cheered when the Emperor's fleets passed overhead. They hid. The taxes were heavier, the rules harsher, and whispers of rebellion grew louder each year. In the great marble halls of the capital, senators argued over how to keep control. Some wanted to strengthen the fleets, others wanted to make peace with the outer colonies. But most of them wanted only to protect their own power. The Emperor sat on his throne silent, watching them tear each other apart with words. He knew the truth better than any of them. His empire was crumbling. Then one morning, a general came forward with a new proposal. "Majesty," he said, standing tall in his silver armor, "there is a world on the edge of known space. It has resources we desperately need, metals, clean water, and energy. The planet is called Earth." The Emperor frowned, trying to recall the name. It stirred something deep in his memory. Earth. That name sounds familiar. "Only a primitive world," the general said quickly. "They are organized but weak. One unified government, a few colonies nearby. They build ships, but none that could stand against ours. We can take what we need without much resistance." The Emperor leaned back thinking, "And what would this gain us?" "Everything," the general replied. "Fuel for our fleets, workers for our factories, and territory to show the galaxy that the Empire still stands strong. One quick strike and the rest will fall back in line." The Emperor's eyes gleamed. For a moment he could almost feel the power of his youth again, the days when his fleets were feared. He nodded slowly. "Prepare your forces. Show the galaxy that the Empire's strength has not faded." Around the room, the generals and ministers murmured in approval. They could already see the glory returning to their ranks, the rewards that would follow. But among them sat a quiet figure, the old scholar who had once spoken of the human message many years ago. His heart sank as he realized what was happening. The memory of that simple warning echoed in his mind. "We come in peace, but we defend our home." He tried to speak. "Majesty," he said softly, "do you remember what I told you long ago? About the world that sent the message into the void?" The Emperor frowned. "You still hold on to that story?" "It was not a story," the scholar said firmly. "It was a warning. And this world you speak of, Earth, is the same one. I beg you, do not make the mistake of underestimating them." The Emperor's voice grew cold. "You think a small planet of soft-spoken creatures could stand against the Empire?" "I think," the scholar replied, "that pride has blinded us before. It will blind us again if we do not listen." The room went silent. The generals exchanged looks. Some smirked. One of them spoke with a mocking tone. "Old men fear ghosts. Let the fleets handle reality." The Emperor gave a short nod and the meeting continued. Plans were drawn, fleets assigned, targets chosen. The scholar said nothing more. He knew there was no stopping it now. Outside, news of the campaign spread quickly. Soldiers cheered as they boarded the warships. Propaganda filled every screen and every square, promising victory and wealth. The people were told that the new conquest would restore their glory. Many believed it because they wanted to believe something. Yet on the edges of the empire, among the colonies that had seen too much of war, there was unease. Some remembered other worlds that had been called easy victories and had turned into endless battles. A few even whispered stories about the humans, about how their tiny signal centuries ago had made the Emperor laugh, but no one could imagine what humans had become since then. Back on Earth, things were peaceful. Humanity had grown cautious, united by the lessons of the past. The planet had suffered through enough wars of its own, and now, for the first time in history, people were focused on building instead of destroying. The United Earth Council had replaced old rivalries. Spaceports circled the planet like rings of light, and colonies stretched from the moon to Mars and beyond. But even in peace, humanity never stopped preparing. The world's defense networks were quiet but active, scanning deep space day and night. The leaders of Earth had not forgotten that the universe was wide, and not all who lived in it would be friendly. One night, deep within the orbital station near Mars, a young officer noticed something unusual. A faint signal, far too large and far too organized to be random, appeared on the outer sensors. It was still distant but moving toward the solar system. Slowly, steadily, she reported it up the chain. Within hours, the message reached the Earth Council's Security Division. The room went silent as they looked at the data. There was no doubt it was a fleet, and not a small one. "Can it be friendly?" someone asked. "Unknown," came the answer. "But its formation is military. No trade markings. No communication signals. They're not hiding either. They're coming straight for us." A quiet voice broke the tension. "Maybe they're the ones who heard our message." The council leader nodded slowly. "Then let's hope they understood it." Back in the Empire's fleet, the admiral in charge was confident. His ships were powerful, each one larger than a city. They moved in perfect formation, shining like a wall of metal across the stars. When he saw the small blue planet in the distance, he smiled. "One world, one victory," he said. His crew cheered. They had been told this mission would be easy, just a single decisive strike. They didn't expect resistance. To them, Earth was a quiet, naive world that had never fought a true war beyond its own skies. But something about the silence ahead bothered him. Usually, when the Empire invaded, there were panic signals, defensive fleets scrambling, attempts to negotiate. Earth sent nothing, just silence. He ordered the communication systems to listen carefully. Hours later, faint transmissions began to arrive from Earth, short, repeated messages in many different languages. Some were old dialects, some were new, but the meaning was the same. "Leave now. Do not cross this line. This is your final warning." The admiral laughed quietly. They still think their words can protect them. He ordered his ships to continue. Behind him, the Emperor's command vessel waited for news, confident that victory was already decided. On one of the smaller Empire ships, a communications officer hesitated before relaying the human messages to headquarters. She had listened to them several times, and there was something about the tone. Calm, not panicked, not begging. It didn't sound like fear. It sounded like certainty. Still, she followed orders. The fleet pressed on. Meanwhile, in the Empire's capital, the old scholar sat in his quiet study, staring at a map of the stars. He could almost feel the moment approaching, as if the universe itself were holding its breath. He whispered again to the empty room, "They warned us once." He wondered what would happen when the Empire ignored that warning again. Days later, the Imperial fleet reached the edge of the solar system. They saw the bright shimmer of Jupiter and the quiet blue light of Earth in the distance. The Admiral smiled once more and prepared his forces for the final approach. No human fleet appeared to stop them. No weapons fired, only the soft, repeating message continued to echo across the stars, calm, unbroken. The Admiral raised his hand. "Begin the operation." His ships moved into attack formation, their engines roaring through space. In his mind, it was already over, but across the solar system, silent eyes were watching. On Mars, on the Moon, and far beyond the orbit of Pluto, hidden satellites came to life. Energy signatures began to flicker. Long silent systems hummed as though waking from sleep. The humans had not spoken loudly because they didn't need to. They were ready, and as the Empire's fleet moved closer, the stars around them seemed to shift, like shadows stretching across the void. Waiting. The Admiral didn't know it yet, but he had just stepped into the final chapter of the Empire's pride. The humans had warned them once. This time, they would show them what that warning truly meant. The stars were quiet when the fleet arrived. The Empire's warships glided into the solar system like shadows made of steel. Thousands of them, each one the size of a small city, their dark hulls glowing faintly under distant sunlight. To the Imperial commanders, it was a magnificent sight, a wall of power no world could resist. But something about Earth's silence felt strange. There were no defenses rushing to meet them, no distress signals, no communication attempts except that same steady broadcast repeating across frequencies. "Leave now. Do not cross this line. This is your final warning." The fleet's admiral stood on his command deck looking at the blue planet through the viewport. "They're bluffing," he said to his officers. Primitive civilizations always try to sound braver than they are. Still, he couldn't ignore a small unease in his chest. He had led dozens of campaigns before and against powerful enemies, worlds with vast armies and fleets of their own. But this was too quiet. Even when they fought the most desperate species, there was always noise, panic, attempts to surrender. Earth offered nothing but silence and warnings. "Prepare the first wave," the Admiral ordered. "Let's show them who rules the stars." Engines roared to life and lines of ships began to move forward, cutting through the darkness toward the blue world. From afar it looked peaceful, oceans glimmering, clouds drifting slowly, continents sleeping under sunlight. Yet as the first Imperial ships neared the orbit of Mars, their scanners began to flicker. For a moment the readings turned blank, as if something invisible was distorting their systems. "Report," the Admiral demanded. "Interference, sir," one technician replied. "It's not natural. Some kind of electronic masking. We can't get clear visuals beyond a certain point." The Admiral frowned. "Masking? From where?" The technician hesitated. "Everywhere, sir. It's surrounding the inner system." The Admiral stared at the screen. "Impossible. No single planet could generate a field like that." But the readings didn't lie. Something was covering Earth's nearby space, something powerful enough to hide signals even from the Empire's advanced sensors. Back on Earth, the people were calm. There was no fear in the streets, no panic in the cities. The news stations did not show the invasion. They simply broadcast one unified message across every channel. Peace if possible, strength if needed. Deep beneath the surface in vast underground control centers, human commanders watched the invading fleet's every move. They had known about the approach for weeks. The early detection networks had seen the Imperial fleet long before it reached the system. They had not responded with threats or shows of power. They had prepared quietly, as they always did. "Phase 1 completed," said one officer in a calm voice. "The masking grid is active. They can't scan us," another nodded. "Phase 2 in standby. All defensive units are cloaked and ready." In a dark chamber filled with screens showing star maps, the head of the Earth Council stood before the gathered strategists. "Remember," he said firmly, "no unnecessary destruction. We defend, not destroy. They came to conquer, and we show them what it means to protect." No one spoke. They didn't need to. Every person in that room understood the weight of what was coming. Humanity had been waiting for this test for generations. They had learned from every mistake their ancestors ever made. Every war, every act of pride. And now, standing united, they were ready. Out in space, the Empire's fleet crossed the orbit of Mars. Their commanders grew confident again. No resistance, they reported. We can move to the next stage, the Admiral smiled. Then proceed. The first wave began descending toward Earth's orbit. Hundreds of ships lined up in precise formation. But as they passed between Mars and Earth, strange readings appeared again, sudden energy spikes from empty regions of space. Admiral, unknown activity detected. Before he could respond, a shimmering distortion appeared to the left of the fleet. For a moment it looked like a cloud of mist barely visible against the darkness. Then from within that mist shapes began to emerge. Massive shapes. They weren't asteroids or satellites or debris. They were ships. Human ships, rising silently from the void, their surfaces reflecting faint sunlight. Unlike the Empire's sleek designs, these vessels looked different, practical, purposeful and scarred by time. They moved as one, forming a wide barrier between the Empire and Earth. Identify those ships, the Admiral barked. The response came seconds later. Unknown origin, but readings confirm energy levels equal to or greater than Imperial cruisers. The Admiral froze. That's not possible. And then the human transmission came again, clear and calm, now in the Empire's own language. You were warned. Leave now. The bridge fell silent. The crew looked at each other, unsure. The Admiral clenched his fists. They dare to threaten us? He gave the order.
Fire warning shots?
I want them to know what they're facing. Several of the frontline Imperial ships charged their weapons and fired bursts of light into the empty space near the human formation. The beams struck invisible walls, shields so strong they barely flickered. A moment later, every human ship powered up. Energy signatures flared bright enough to light up the surrounding space. It wasn't aggression, it was a show of readiness. A silent message that said, "We can match you." The Admiral's confidence wavered. "How many of them are there?" he whispered. 100, came the quiet reply. Maybe more. Some are cloaked beyond detection range. And sir, their fleet is growing. New contacts appearing behind the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. The Admiral stared at the screen in disbelief. How had they built this? How could one world, once considered primitive, create a defense network like this in such a short time? Back on Earth, the Council received word. Contact made. They fired first. The leader of the Council closed his eyes for a moment. Then we respond with control. Disable, not destroy, orders were sent. Within minutes, the human fleet moved. Their ships did not rush forward in chaos. They advanced with perfect coordination, each maneuver calculated. Energy pulses fired, not to kill, but to disable. The Empire's front line staggered. Systems went dark, engines failed, weapons shorted out. One after another, Imperial ships drifted powerless through space, alive but helpless. The Admiral's ship was still active. His crew stared in shock as dozens of their strongest vessels went silent. What kind of weapons are those? Someone shouted. Not weapons, the Admiral muttered. Control systems. The realization chilled him. The humans weren't just fighting. They were choosing not to destroy. They were showing restraint. He tried to rally his forces, sending emergency signals to regroup, but before they could respond, a single human vessel moved forward. It was larger than the others, painted with symbols the Empire's translation systems couldn't fully interpret. A voice came through the comms, calm, clear, and steady. Galactic Empire. We are the humans of Earth. You crossed into our home. We do not seek war, but we do not run from it. You were warned once. You were warned again. This is the last time we will speak before we act. The Admiral felt a deep silence fill the room. He wanted to respond with pride, with anger, but something in that voice made him hesitate. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't rage. It was confidence. Quiet, controlled confidence that came only from strength. He cut the transmission. His crew waited for orders, but for the first time in his career, he didn't know what to give. Back on Earth, people went about their daily lives. Children went to school. Markets stayed open. Families watched the evening skies, unaware that a galactic armada hung above them. Humanity had learned to trust its protectors, to believe that fear no longer ruled their world. High above, in the stillness of space, the balance between peace and destruction hung on a thread. The Empire's fleet, once so sure of victory, now faced an opponent that fought Not for conquest, but for home. The Admiral looked again at the blue world and finally understood what the scholar had meant all those years. How the humans had not sent that message out of pride. They had sent it out of truth. We come in peace, but we defend our home. He had ignored it. Now he was staring at the proof of its meaning, and though the battle had not yet begun in full, the war, in his heart, was already lost. The first shot had been fired, but it wasn't humanity who did it. The Empire had made the move, confident that power alone could decide the outcome. Yet instead of fear, they were met with silence, a silence that felt heavier than war itself. When the Imperial beams hit the invisible shields guarding the human fleet, the light simply vanished, as if the void itself had swallowed it. No explosions, no damage, just quiet defiance. The humans hadn't fired back yet, but every Imperial officer could feel it. They were being watched, measured, and studied. The Admiral stood stiffly on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the glowing blue planet that refused to show fear. "Why don't they attack?" he muttered. "Perhaps they're afraid," one of his officers replied. "No," the Admiral said softly. "Afraid would mean panic. This feels like patience." He didn't like patience. Patience meant control, and control meant strength. Suddenly, a warning alarm echoed through the bridge. "Sir, massive energy readings near Jupiter." The Admiral's eyes snapped toward the display. "How many ships?" "Unknown. Wait, hundreds, maybe thousands." "They're decloaking, sir." One by one, the dark side of Jupiter lit up with silent flashes. Human ships emerged from the shadows, surrounding the gas giant like glowing specks of light. Each one bore the same symbol, a simple blue circle representing Earth, surrounded by white stars. The Admiral's throat went dry. They were hiding in plain sight. He had underestimated them completely. From the human command center on Mars, calm voices coordinated every move. "All defense lines active. Fleet Sigma, hold position near Jupiter. Fleet Terra, maintain orbital shield alignment. Civilian sectors safe. There was no shouting, no chaos. Every order came with precision." The people on Earth had prepared for this moment for generations, though no one hoped it would ever come. Inside a quiet underground facility beneath the Earth's surface, leaders watched the Imperial fleet through live feeds. The main screen showed hundreds of enemy ships suspended in orbit, glittering like silver daggers. A senior officer spoke. "They still think we're unarmed." "Let them," the council head replied calmly. "We don't start wars, but if they cross the line again, we end them swiftly." Across Earth's orbit, hidden stations began to hum softly. Satellites that had once seemed ordinary were suddenly alive with power. The masking field faded, revealing massive defense platforms and silent watchtowers that stretched across the upper atmosphere. Every part of Earth's system was connected. Moon bases, Mars colonies, asteroid outposts, even the rings of Saturn. All part of a defense web built not for conquest, but for survival. Humanity had learned long ago that the greatest defense was not aggression, it was preparation. Back near Jupiter, the Empire's fleet tried to adjust. The Admiral barked orders to reform ranks, but interference crackled through his systems. Communications dropped. Weapons flickered. "Sir, something's jamming our controls," one of his crew shouted. The Admiral slammed his fist against the railing. "Find the source!" Before anyone could respond, the ship's lights dimmed, then brightened again. All across the fleet, systems rebooted one by one. The Imperial technology, so proud and advanced, had never faced anything like this. An opponent who understood how to fight without fighting. The humans had sent a signal, a digital wave sweeping through the enemy network, disabling command links, shutting down targeting systems, and locking navigation. It wasn't destruction, it was control. "Sir, they've taken our targeting arrays offline," whispered one officer. "We can't fire." The Admiral stared at the console, watching as command after command failed. "How is that possible?" "Our systems are encrypted beyond—" He stopped. He didn't know how to explain it. On the human flagship orbiting near Earth, technicians monitored the progress. One of them spoke softly. "Fleet neutralized. They can't fire, but life support remains stable." "Good," came the reply. "We're not here to destroy, only to remind." Then, for the first time since the invasion began, humanity spoke, not through warnings but through a message meant for the entire galaxy. A transmission broadcast from every human vessel, every orbital station and even the surface of Earth itself. It wasn't loud or threatening. It was steady, calm, and clear. Galactic Empire, you entered our system without invitation. You fired upon us. We will not return destruction for destruction. We will give you one choice: leave peacefully or be escorted away. No harm will come to your people if you choose peace. The message repeated in every known galactic language. On the Imperial flagship, the Admiral felt a chill. The voice was confident but not arrogant, firm but not cruel. He realized too late that the Empire had misunderstood everything. They had assumed humanity's silence was weakness when in truth it was discipline. He tried to send a message back to the Emperor, but long-range channels were blocked. His only link now was the short-range broadcast from his own ship. "They have us contained," he whispered. "Completely." On the Imperial capital world, the Emperor received fragments of reports, confusing, incomplete. One moment his admirals claimed victory. The next, transmissions cut off mid-sentence. He called for his advisors. "What is happening? Why has our fleet gone silent?" One of them, pale and nervous, said, "Majesty, reports indicate the humans have developed technologies we cannot yet understand. Some call it phase interference." The Emperor clenched his jaw. "Impossible. One small planet cannot outmatch us," but deep down he knew the truth. Pride had blinded him. Back near Earth, the humans made their final move. The lead ship advanced toward the Imperial flagship. It didn't aim its weapons. Instead, a small pod detached and drifted toward the enemy vessel. The Admiral's crew watched it approach, unsure whether to shoot it down or let it dock. "Sir, it's unarmed," said a sensor officer. "It's transmitting a signal, offering communication." The Admiral hesitated, then nodded. "Open the channel." A holographic projection appeared on the bridge, a human representative. Dressed simply, calm eyes, steady voice. "You came here with the intent to rule," the human said. "But you have seen what we stand for. We fight only when forced. We defend what we love. Your Emperor may not understand that yet, but you will." The Admiral remained silent. The human continued. "Take your ships. Leave this system. Return home. Tell your Emperor what you have witnessed, that humanity warned you once, and we mean what we say. We do not conquer, but we do not bow." The hologram faded. For a long moment, the bridge was quiet. No one dared move. The Admiral stared at the space where the projection had been, then slowly turned toward his crew. "Prepare withdrawal," he said softly. His officers looked at him in disbelief. "Sir, do as I command," he said. "This is not a battle we can win." And with that, the Imperial fleet began to pull back. Their engines ignited, turning away from Earth. Not a single human ship followed. They simply watched, ensuring no harm came to anyone as the invaders retreated. From Earth, the people saw bright lines streaking across the night sky, burning trails of ships leaving orbit. Many didn't even know what had happened, and maybe that was for the best. The next morning, the world continued as normal. Children went to school, markets opened, and the sky was blue again. Humanity had faced an empire and chosen restraint over revenge. On the Empire's return journey, silence filled the ships. The soldiers who once believed they were unstoppable now looked out at the stars with quiet awe. They had seen something rare, a species that carried power not as a weapon but as a promise. When the Admiral finally reached the capital, he knelt before the Emperor. "Majesty," he said, voice trembling, "we underestimated them. They are not what we thought. They warned us once, and they meant it. If we go to them again with war, we will not return." The Emperor said nothing. For the first time in his life, he felt uncertainty, not of his own strength, but of another's. And far away on the small blue planet that had once been ignored, humanity looked toward the stars not with pride, but with peace. They didn't celebrate their victory. They simply returned to their work, knowing that the galaxy had finally heard them. "We come in peace, but we defend our home." Those words, once whispered into the dark by a small probe centuries ago, had now become a living truth across the stars. And somewhere, in the quiet of space, that old signal still traveled on, unchanged, unstoppable, carrying with it the voice of a world that would never forget what it meant to stand for peace, even in the face of war. When the Imperial fleet vanished from Earth's orbit, many thought it was over. But peace after war isn't simple. The silence that followed was heavy, not with fear but with questions. Why did they come? Would they return? And most of all, what would humanity do next? For days, the skies above Earth remained quiet. No new signals, no strange movements, only the calm hum of satellites and the soft glow of cities below. Humanity had faced an empire that ruled the stars, and they had won, not through blood but through strength of will. Yet deep down, everyone knew that the story wasn't finished. In the underground command center, the council met again. Around the wide circular table sat men and women whose faces showed both relief and concern. They left, one of them said, his voice low. But the Empire won't forget this. Another nodded. They'll return. Not tomorrow, not next week, but someday. And next time they won't come unprepared. Silence filled the room for a moment. Then the council head spoke, calm and thoughtful. Then we prepare not for war but for understanding. They fear what they do not know. Let them know us, not as enemies, but as equals. It was a bold thought. The galaxy had long seen humanity as primitive, a small species from a small world, unimportant in the grand scale of the stars. But after the Empire's defeat, the balance had shifted. Other worlds had seen it happen. The story of what Earth had done was spreading like fire through the void. Some called the humans the silent ones, others called them the peacekeepers. But most called them what they had always been. Dangerous, only when pushed too far. Meanwhile, far across the galaxy, in the shining halls of the Imperial Palace, tension hung in the air. The Emperor sat on his high throne, eyes cold and distant. The admiral who had led the failed invasion knelt before him, waiting for judgment. You faced a planet of primitives, the Emperor said quietly, and yet you return in defeat. Explain. The admiral's voice trembled slightly, but his words were honest. Majesty, they are not primitives. They are something else. They possess technologies we cannot explain. They could have destroyed us, but they didn't. They let us go. The Emperor leaned forward. They let you go? Yes, Majesty. They gave a warning once more. They said if we ever attack again, it will be the end of the Empire. The court whispered among themselves. Some laughed at the thought. A single planet threatening the greatest power in the galaxy. But the Emperor didn't laugh. He saw the look in his admiral's eyes. It wasn't fear, it was truth. He waved his hand. Leave me. When the throne room emptied, the Emperor stood alone, staring out at the stars. He remembered a report centuries old about a small blue planet that had once sent a message into space. A message of peace, could it be them? Could this Earth be the same world that spoke those words so long ago? The thought unsettled him. Back on Earth, humanity was changing. Scientists worked day and night, studying the Empire's abandoned technology. Engineers built new defenses, not to dominate but to protect. And everywhere, a quiet pride spread among the people. For the first time in history, Earth wasn't just a small planet, it was a voice that echoed through the stars. Still, not everyone agreed on the same path. Some believed humanity should expand, to build its own empire and stand as a power equal to the others. Others believed they should stay silent and watchful, guarding their home and letting peace speak for itself. One evening, under the soft glow of the moon, a group of young cadets trained at the Orbital Academy. They weren't like soldiers of old, they didn't dream of war. They dreamed of exploration, of peace through strength. As one of them looked out the observation window, she whispered, "Do you think they'll ever understand us?" Her instructor, standing beside her, replied quietly, "Maybe one day. Understanding takes time, but fear fades faster than wisdom grows." The cadet smiled faintly. "So we wait?" "We wait," the instructor said. "And we prepare, not for battle, but for when they're ready to talk." And so humanity waited. Months turned into years. No fleets appeared, no new threats came, but the Empire was not sleeping. In secret, the Emperor sent spies, small drones and listening devices, to observe Earth from afar. They watched the humans rebuild, expand their colonies, and speak to other races with calm confidence. To the Empire's surprise, humanity didn't boast of victory. They didn't threaten anyone. Instead, they offered help. They shared medicine, technology, and knowledge with small, struggling civilizations nearby. Why? One imperial minister asked during a council meeting. Why would they help others even after what we did? The Emperor's answer was quiet but sharp. Because they can. That was the first time the Empire began to doubt its own ways. Soon, the smaller races of the galaxy started to turn toward Earth, not out of fear, but hope. They saw that humans were different, not perfect but fair. Not conquerors but defenders. And slowly, without fighting a single war, Earth's influence began to spread. At first, the Empire ignored it. But when entire border worlds started leaving imperial rule to align with Earth's peaceful alliance, anger grew in the Emperor's heart. "They're taking our territory without firing a shot," he hissed. "They're winning without war," one of his generals replied carefully. "Majesty, perhaps it's not about power. Perhaps they are trying to unite the galaxy through peace." The Emperor's face hardened. "Peace is a lie built by the weak. Send envoys. I want to know what they truly want." When the Imperial envoys arrived on Mars, a neutral ground chosen by the humans, they expected to see arrogance. Instead, they saw calm faces, open halls, and no guards carrying weapons. The meeting took place inside a glass dome overlooking the red planet's horizon. The lead human representative greeted them politely. "You've come far. We welcome conversation." The Imperial envoy narrowed his eyes. "Your actions have weakened the Empire. Entire systems now follow your word. What do you intend to do?" The human's response was simple. "Nothing. They came to us by choice. We don't control them. We only listen." The envoy frowned. "Then why help them?" "Because someone should." The word struck deep. For generations, the Empire had ruled by fear. The idea of ruling by kindness was almost unthinkable. The envoy hesitated, then asked, "Do you truly believe peace can hold forever?" The human looked out at the stars. "No, but it can last long enough for the next generation to learn something better." The meeting ended without treaties, without promises, but something changed. For the first time in centuries, the Empire's people began to question what they'd been told. Stories of Earth spread like whispers in the dark, stories of humans who defended themselves but refused to destroy. In time, even within the Empire, small movements began to form, voices calling for reform, for unity, for a future where power didn't come from domination. Back on Earth, the Council watched the slow changes with quiet satisfaction. "They're beginning to see," one of them said. "Yes," replied another, "but we must stay humble. Power can make even good hearts blind. We defend peace only as long as we remember what we once were." That night, the sky above Earth was filled with satellites glimmering like stars. Children looked up, not with fear, but with wonder. They didn't know the weight of what their world had done. They only knew that the stars no longer felt distant or hostile. For humanity, the galaxy was no longer a threat. It was a promise. And though many dangers still lay ahead, there was one truth that no empire, no army, and no power could erase. The humans had shown the universe that strength wasn't about destruction. It was about control, patience, and compassion. The Emperor, alone in his palace, looked once more toward the night sky. For the first time, he didn't see a small blue planet. He saw a mirror, a reflection of what his empire could have been if it had chosen differently. He whispered softly to himself, "They warned us once, and we didn't listen. Perhaps it's time we do." Far across the stars on Earth, a signal pulsed again into the void, a simple message. Unchanged from centuries ago, this is Earth. We come in peace. Only this time the galaxy was finally listening. Years passed. The war that never truly began had already changed the galaxy more than any battle could have. The memory of the Imperial fleet's defeat over Earth became a story, told quietly among the stars, passed down in whispers. Some called it a legend, others a warning. But to humanity it was simply history, a lesson that power must never replace peace. On Earth, life returned to calm routine. The cities glowed bright at night, the oceans shimmered under the moon, and the people continued building, learning, and dreaming. Yet behind that peaceful rhythm, the world was never unguarded. The humans had seen what lay beyond the stars. They had seen greed, fear, and pride disguised as order. They knew it might come again. At the same time, their quiet strength had begun to change the universe. Systems once loyal to the Empire started to turn away. Worlds tired of oppression looked to Earth not for weapons, but for guidance. The humans never demanded allegiance. They never asked for tribute. They simply offered knowledge, ways to heal, to grow, to protect without destroying, and so, across the stars, a quiet movement began, a shift not built by soldiers, but by hope. In the Imperial Palace, the Emperor sat alone in his great chamber. His empire was still vast, but no longer unquestioned. Whispers of rebellion grew louder each day. People had begun asking dangerous questions. Why do we rule through fear? Why not through understanding? The Emperor stared at a small device on his table, a human transmission receiver captured years ago during the invasion. It had one message stored within, the same message sent to the galaxy centuries before. This is Earth. We come in peace. He had listened to it many times, yet this time it felt different. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't submission. It was strength wrapped in kindness. He wondered if perhaps he had misunderstood everything, but even as doubt filled his heart, those around him whispered otherwise. You must remind them who holds power, his advisors urged. The humans make the people forget fear. Strike now before they rise further. The Emperor didn't answer. For the first time he felt old, not in body but in soul. The weight of centuries of conquest pressed down on him. What had all the wars achieved? What had all the destruction truly built? Still, pride is not easily silenced, and the Empire's pride was a monster that refused to die. Far away in Earth's orbital command station, the Council met once again. Messages from outer systems poured in, some filled with gratitude, others with warning. The Empire is moving again, said one of the officers. Not an invasion, but they're gathering fleets near the border. The Council leader nodded slowly. They're afraid. They think peace is a weapon. What do we do? Someone asked. We do what we've always done, came the calm reply. We wait, and if they come again, we remind them who we are. Preparations began quietly. No parades, no speeches, just silent efficiency. The great defense web of the solar system came alive once more. Energy fields humming, stations aligning, and human fleets taking calm, steady positions across the planets. The people of Earth didn't panic. They didn't shout for war. They went to work, confident that their defenders would hold the line, not out of pride, but out of duty. And then, one cold morning, sensors detected movement. Thousands of Imperial ships emerged near the edge of the system, glowing like silver shards in the dark. But unlike before, they didn't charge. They didn't fire. They simply stood there, motionless, waiting. Inside the Imperial flagship, a new admiral gave his report to the Emperor, who was watching from the palace through a live feed. Majesty, we have reached the human system. Awaiting your command. The Emperor stared at the image of Earth, a small blue sphere shining against the blackness. Do not attack, he said. The Admiral looked surprised. Majesty? I said, do not attack, repeated the Emperor. Open a channel instead. A signal request reached the human flagship. The officers exchanged cautious glances. For years, the Empire had ignored all communication attempts. This was unexpected. Patch it through, the commander said quietly. And then, for the first time since the war that wasn't, the Emperor of the Galactic Empire spoke directly to humanity. His voice was low, proud but weary. This is the Emperor of the Galactic Empire, he said. Years ago, our fleets came to your world seeking dominance. You could have destroyed us, yet you didn't. You gave us mercy. I did not understand it then. He paused, looking off-screen for a moment as though searching for the right words. I do now. On the human flagship, everyone fell silent. The Emperor continued. I was taught that mercy is weakness, that peace invites rebellion. But your world has proven otherwise. You have built unity without fear, power without cruelty. I can no longer ignore that. Then his tone shifted, filled with quiet sincerity. The Empire has lost its way. Our people grow restless. Our borders crumble, not from your attacks, but from our own arrogance. I cannot undo the past, but I can begin something new. The human commander leaned forward. What are you saying, Emperor? I am asking, the Emperor replied softly, for peace, not a truce, not silence. True peace, a place at your table if you will have it. For a long time, no one spoke. The humans on the bridge exchanged uncertain looks. Was it a trick? A test, or was it real? Finally, the commander replied. We will speak with the council. Wait for our answer. The transmission ended. On Earth, when the news reached the council, there was disbelief. Some wanted to reject it outright. Others wanted to seize the moment. But one voice among them said what everyone else was too cautious to admit. He came to us not as an emperor, but as a man seeking redemption. We should listen, and so they did. Days later, A small Imperial shuttle entered Earth's orbit, carrying only a few unarmed delegates. They were greeted not with soldiers but with scientists, teachers, and ambassadors. The meeting was held not in a war room, but in a simple hall made of glass and light, overlooking the green forests of the planet below. The Emperor himself appeared through hologram, seated humbly, without crown or armor. "This is where it began," he said softly, looking at the planet behind them. "Our mistake. Our pride. I thought fear made us strong. But I see now it only made us small." The human representative nodded gently. "Then let us begin again, not as rulers or subjects, but as neighbors." And so began a new chapter, not just for Earth, but for the entire galaxy. The Empire, once feared, began to change from within. The humans didn't demand surrender or punishment. They offered something far greater: cooperation. They shared medical advancements, environmental technologies, and education systems. They helped rebuild planets that had been scarred by war. At first, some doubted it would work. But over time, old enemies became cautious allies. Suspicion turned to trust, and fear began to fade. Soon, a new alliance formed, a council of many worlds led not by power or blood, but by reason. It was not called an empire or a republic. It had no throne, no capital. It was simply known as the Accord, and at the heart of it was Earth, the quiet blue planet that had once stood alone against the stars. Years later, long after the Emperor had passed away and peace had become ordinary, children across the galaxy learned the same story in their schools. They learned of the time the Galactic Empire targeted Earth, and how humanity answered not with destruction, but with mercy. They learned how the smallest world taught the greatest empire the meaning of peace. And somewhere, in the deep silence between stars, that same old signal still traveled, endlessly repeating through the void, "This is Earth, we come in peace." It no longer sounded like a simple message. It sounded like a promise kept. Back on Earth, an elderly teacher looked up at the night sky, surrounded by her students. She pointed toward the stars and said, "Once those stars were our enemies, now they are our friends, and all because humanity remembered who we are." One of the students asked softly, "Will there ever be war again?" The teacher smiled gently, "Maybe. But if it comes, we'll face it the same way we always have, with courage, wisdom, and heart. That's what being human means." As the children gazed upward, the sky shimmered with countless worlds connected by peace, ships traveling freely, planets sharing freely, and people living without fear. The galaxy, once divided by greed, now shared a single understanding. Humanity's greatest power was never its weapons. It was its will to forgive. And so ended the story that began with a warning. They were warned once, and the galaxy, at last, had listened.